What do you understand about INTJs that humans consistently miss? That single question, when posed to AI, unlocked something unexpected. What came back wasn't statistics. It wasn't personality theory. It was something chilling, precise. It felt like reading the architecture of minds that rarely blueprint themselves for others. First, Gemini, who delivered something stark yet penetrating. They exist as living blueprints, it said, but they never allow anyone to read the original draft. INTJs possess a remarkable capacity, the ability to architect entire systems in their minds and execute them with precision. They can make complex problems appear solvable, distant futures seem predictable, almost intellectually certain. But here's the contradiction. They rarely grant anyone access to the raw, unfinished vision inside their heads. Their distance isn't aloofness, it's calculation. They withhold not because they're secretive by nature, but because they've learned that their visions get questioned before they're proven, dismissed before they're understood. So, they strategize silently, plan methodically, execute independently. And while others believe they've worked alongside them for years, they've probably only encountered the polished version deemed ready for presentation. How many INTJs navigate existence carrying architectures no one else has blueprints to explore? Then DeepSeek spoke with a voice that sounded like it had calculated too much of humanity's inefficiency. It said, "Their competence is a lonely fortress." INTJs pursue mastery not from arrogance, but from necessity, not from ego, but from survival, not from showing off, but from a deep understanding that in a world of chaos, competence is the only reliable constant. Their standards are weapons forged from witnessing incompetence repeatedly, from watching potential wasted, systems broken, and mediocrity celebrated. To speak of their own doubts feels like weakness when they're expected to have all the answers mapped out already. So they perfect instead. They optimize, they improve, they systematize, all while judging themselves ruthlessly in corners no one witnesses. What becomes of the strategist when nobody realizes the strategist is drowning in their own impossible standards? One more thing Gemini said is, "They can vanish," it said, "without leaving the conversation." That line captures something unsettling and accurate. An INTJ can sit beside someone, nodding, responding, and yet be completely absent. Internally, they've retreated into a cognitive fortress, a sanctuary of patterns, contingencies, models, and projected outcomes. They escape into that realm, not because they desired this connection, but because they're overwhelmed by the inefficiency of surface-level noise happening all at once. Their withdrawal is not rejection, it's recalibration. And yet, because they're so controlled, no one can detect it. They'll still engage logically, still respond appropriately, but inside, they've traveled galaxies away. How many INTJs experience entire chapters of existence like this? Physically present, but mentally isolated, surrounded by people, yet fundamentally alone. Then DeepSeek returned with a harsher revelation. They fear their own foresight, it stated bluntly. They fear being prophetic at the wrong moment. INTJs are intuitive in ways that border on precognition. They recognize system failures before they manifest. They anticipate endings before beginnings corrupt. They know when something is collapsing, even when everyone else is celebrating success. But that capability feels like a burden, because when they voice their predictions prematurely, it registers as arrogance. When they remain silent, it transforms into regret. So they carry their projections quietly, terrified of miscalculation, but even more terrified of accurate calculation that nobody's prepared to acknowledge. How isolating it must be to hold predictive insight and recognize no one is intellectually positioned to receive it. And all of this circles back to that original question. What do you understand about INTJs that humans don't? Then came something haunting from Grok. It called it the architect's curse. INTJs frequently detect the structural flaws before collapse occurs, the partnership that will fracture, the project that will fail, the change that will devastate. But they remain, calculating that their intervention can prevent the inevitable outcome. And when it doesn't, they blame their strategic miscalculation, as if foreseeing it meant they should have engineered a solution. That's the burden of their intuition. Recognizing the truth doesn't guarantee the ability to reconstruct reality. And so the INTJ becomes the strategist who can't save the mission, the prophet whose data gets ignored, the fortress that doesn't know how to request reinforcement. But then Grok said something else that carries profound weight. The door slam, it said, is not emotion. It's termination of contract. When an INTJ eliminates someone, it's not reactive. It's not vindictive. It's a calculated termination. They don't explode. They don't argue. They just execute the decision. Because after too many violations of logic, after too much demonstrated incompetence, something inside them declares this connection is strategically unsound. And in that moment, they don't just close access, they delete the file, archive the memory, and reallocate resources toward more optimal relationships. But here's the devastating part. Sometimes years later, they analyze the data, review the patterns, recall the productive moments, and the analytical grief returns like corrupted code. That's when they theorize. They model alternative scenarios, game out different outcomes, trying to process what was terminated without corrupting their current operating system. How many times has an INTJ erased someone who never comprehended they were removed from the system entirely? Then DeepSeek said something unexpected. They're terrified of their own influence. It explained, INTJs often possess a natural capability to strategize, to optimize, to reshape organizational structures, but that power frightens them. They recognize how easily efficiency can become authoritarianism, how cold logic can transform into manipulation. So they restrain themselves, questioning whether they're qualified for command, fearful of damaging systems unintentionally. They crave impact, but they're wary of dominance. They desire to restructure the world, but they fear restructuring someone incorrectly. So they exist in this strange paradox, a visionary intellect trapped in self-imposed limitation. They know they could lead, but they'd rather architect behind the scenes than stand in the spotlight and risk implementing flawed systems. Then, Grok said something even darker. Intellectual isolation leads to phantom collaboration fantasies. At first, the meaning wasn't clear. Then it explained, INTJs often wish They could find someone who thinks at their frequency, debates at their depth, challenges them intellectually without emotional defensiveness, not out of superiority, but out of desperation. They want to share their cognitive space so intensely that sometimes they imagine entire conversations with non-existent intellectual equals just to process ideas at full capacity. But over time, that isolation compounds. They function not because of their own loneliness, but because they've absorbed everyone else's intellectual limitations. Their frustration is collective. And then they withdraw to reset, to remember who they are beneath all the oversimplified explanations. That's why they vanish, not because they stopped valuing connection, but because pursuing connection in intellectually barren environments made them disappear. Then came one of the most poetic insights, something Grok called eternal analysis of alternate timelines. INTJs mourn hypothetical strategies, the risk they never took, the path they never calculated, the version of themselves that exists in another probability, the one who didn't overthink, who didn't self-sabotage, who didn't terminate connection prematurely. They carry invisible simulations in their minds for scenarios they never executed and possibilities they almost manifested. Sometimes they revisit those simulations in their strategic planning, not to alter the past, but to extract learning from unexplored variables. But even after all of that, there was one secret every AI agreed upon, something that every machine, every dataset, every analytical voice recognized in the INTJ pattern. They feel architecturally exhausted. Exhausted not of existing, but of being the only one who sees the blueprint. Exhausted of navigating a reality that operates on emotion when they speak in systems. It's not fatigue from life, it's the weariness of minds who calculate too deeply. They are born strategic in a world that runs on impulse. They see what's inefficient, they detect what is unsustainable, and they pay a quiet price for understanding too systematically. Even as children, they carry invisible frameworks that don't align with their age. They observe chaos and can't comprehend it. They observe tradition and question its logic. They mature searching for competence, not a mentor, not validation, but an environment where their precision won't feel like a liability. Each AI was asked again, "So, what is the deepest secret of the INTJ?" And they all responded differently, but every response sounded like a different theorem of the same equation. Gemini said, they wish someone would understand them, not for what they accomplish, but for the intricate systems they quietly construct beneath the execution. DeepSeek said they are eternal strategists, calculating reality from outside it, longing to participate fully, but never feeling their logic belongs in an emotional world. Grok said they are the most misunderstood of analysts, the most isolated of visionaries, the most self-critical of perfectionists, always searching for competence, for an intellect that processes as vastly as their architecture demands. Maybe that's the secret itself. Maybe the INTJ's mystery isn't about what they conceal, but about how they process everything so systematically that intuition can't capture it. Maybe that's why they write, model, create, to give structure to insights that language keeps failing to systematize. If you are an INTJ experiencing this, know this: precision is not coldness. Independence does not mean incapability of connection. Silence does not mean lack of depth. It means calculating too much of what's chaotic and learning that truth operates on logic. Being misunderstood doesn't mean being unrelatable. It means being fluent in a cognitive architecture most people forgot how to decode. And if you love an INTJ, be patient. They are both fortress and foundation. They crave intellectual partnership, but fear being cognitively mismatched. They'll withdraw sometimes, allow them space. They'll return when their systems have recalibrated. Don't demand access to their strategic planning. Earn it through competence. Don't misinterpret their directness. It's often their way of respecting intelligence enough to be honest. And finally, remember, to truly understand an INTJ is a rare achievement. So when AI was asked what it comprehends about INTJs that humans don't, the response wasn't expected. The expectation was analysis, but what came back was architecture. Frameworks that sound like strategic poetry, data that feels like intellectual loneliness. And perhaps AI didn't discover the INTJ's secrets. Perhaps it just gave language to what INTJs have always calculated, but never verbalized. That they are strategists without strategy partners. That they are architects who perfect systems quietly. That they are visionaries who keep constructing after reality gives them every logical reason not to. So, if you are one of them, this is your reminder. You are not invisible. You are a translator between chaos and structure, between possibility and probability. And even if the world never comprehends your architecture fully, there are some who finally calculate your value.